The world is evolving at a faster pace than ever before. As we begin the path to recovery after worldwide disruption, this podcast explores how the design industry can adapt to changing expectations and create a better future for your businesses and consumers. I'm your co-host, Peter Marion, and you're listening to Create Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast. Touch plays a critical role in socialization. From hugging our friends, kissing our lovers, to shaking hands on a deal, touch plays an important role in how we exist in the world. Physical contact of this kind releases oxytocin, a hormone that reduces stress and anxiety, boosts positive mood, and stimulates social bonding. Prior to the pandemic, we were facing an intimacy recession, as people spent more time socializing on their phones and less time connecting with each other in person. The coronavirus pandemic has accelerated this shift even further, with lockdowns putting physical distance between us, and in some regions, as people start to come back out into the world, there's the constant fear of contamination or transmission. In this episode, we're going to be exploring what the fear of touch looks like for consumers, but also what it will mean for both the beauty and retail industries. How can we remain safely apart while also finding ways of maintaining emotional connection? To help find some answers to these big questions, we've brought together some of our WGSN experts. First up, we've got Claire Varga, head of WGSN Beauty. Hi Claire, how are you?
Hi Peter, I'm great, thank you.
And you've just come back from holiday, so how was that?
Oh, it was lovely. I looked out with the weather and yes, I'm fully relaxed and ready to chat.
And we also have Laura Saunter, a fellow senior strategist on WGSN Insight. Hey Laura, how are you?
Hi Peter, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. And you have also been on holiday, so tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was good, thanks. Just nice and chilled. Rained a lot, but, that's the UK.
And lastly, we have Martina Rocca, a strategist on WGSN Insight. Martina, how are you?
Hello, Peter. I'm very well, and you?
Good, good. And you are actually on holiday at the moment, so tell us a little bit about where you are at the moment.
I'm very well. I'm based in Mexico City. Very nice. Such a nice new landscape.
Okay, so let's begin. So we've moved into this period where there's a real fear of contact. Martina, can you please talk a little bit about what this means from a consumer perspective?
Sure. So I think that the pandemic has radically changed consumer attitudes around contact and touch. So imposed physical distancing and fear of contagion has made people very fearful of touch, of interacting physically with each other. But we have to understand that touch is such a basic human need that is used for activating a series of mechanisms in the human brain, such as mood regulations or such as relaxation. So we need human touch, we need skin-to-skin physical interaction. So the absence of physical interaction has a very negative impact on mental and physical well-being in humans. So I believe that consumer post-pandemic will seek emotional and physical touch in consumer experiences, in brand experiences that should focus much more on emotional value, comfort, and distress.
And in terms of this idea of intimacy and connection, I think one of the things that you talked about in that great touch report that you did, Martina, was really around that idea of skin hunger. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So as I mentioned previously, coronavirus has really changed attitudes around touch and intimacy because of social isolation, distancing, and of course, fear of touch. We are not interacting physically with each other. So the traditional attitudes around intimacy and relationship have changed very quickly and very radically. So for example, at first day, kissing or taking somebody by hands has taken a new, completely different new value and meaning. So for example, the element of consent will become very important. So we will ask consent and permission to interact physically with a partner or with a new friend or somebody we don't know.
That's a really interesting thing that you mentioned there around consent and conversations. And I think that ties into much more broader sort of themes that we've been thinking about around romantic relationships, more generally speaking, even before the pandemic, this idea about sort of very conscious communication. Sort of to open this up to everybody else here, as sort of intimacy was a key theme that we were seeing before the pandemic, how do you expect that to shift now that we're all really scared of coming into each other? Claire, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's a really interesting subject. But the thing is, we're not just scared of other people. We're actually even fearful of our own hands. Is one of the things that we're discovering in beauty. We touch our own faces around 16, times an hour, and that's for various reasons. It can, but a lot of it is for comfort and reassurance. This fear of not being able to self-soothe ourselves, to actually touch our own skin directly is really complicated, and we're looking for ways to sort of mitigate touch, or actually find other ways to just completely reduce the touching our faces altogether.
And Laura, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, touching things, especially in shopping and in retail, which is what I sort of specialise in and think about, is so important. Like touching a product, touching a garment, trying something on, being able to feel that you have a kind of intimate connection with the product that you're buying. So obviously, everything's had to kind of be reassessed, and everyone wants a lot more sort of control and a lot more space when they're in a store now. So, before, stores were all about kind of encouraging people to touch things, all about human connection, all about building an emotional connection between the brand and the consumer. And now it's almost like this kind of focus on touch-free commerce, cleanliness, like this kind of low-impact society. So I think for retailers, they're really having to shift the way that they think about communicating with consumers. And I think that's something that is going to, be a consideration for a long time.
Absolutely. And I think that idea of tactility is so important, and how, the idea of picking up a piece of beautiful fabric like a cashmere, and that has a real emotional resonance for us, and not being able to do that really makes it much harder to make a purchasing decision when you're out shopping.
What we've lost in physical intimacy, though, it's quite interesting. I think we've gained in emotional intimacy within our retail experiences. Brands, retailers are having to work much harder to make those connections with us. So in beauty, that's meant lots of one-to-one, consultations. You get a lot more interpersonal time. We've had virtual conversations with experts that we normally wouldn't get anywhere near. We would not get access to these people. Heightened delivery, it's almost become a very concierge-like experience. So in some ways, the customer services has got better, and a lot of people, I'm talking to, and clients that we're talking to, have felt that they have a much stronger bond. So it's interesting that even though they've lost some physical intimacy, they've gained emotionally. And for brands, that's amazing. That equals loyalty. It's much harder, as we all know, to break up with somebody that you have an emotional bond with, and I think that carries into retail as well.
That's actually that's a really key topic. I think we're really going to go into a lot of depth in this episode. Laura, sorry, I know that you have a lot of thoughts on that. What do you think about what this sort of high touch and emotional connection looks like in the longer term?
Yeah, I think, traditionally, you always saw sort of luxury brands being synonymous with impeccable customer service, but that's really being recreated throughout all retailers, mid-level mass retailers as well, because essentially they're having to really up the ante around service. And also what this means is that a lot of retailers have been forced to really, really step up their omnichannel strategies. So things like what Claire mentioned around delivery, things like buying online and picking up in store, things like curbside pickup, 1 hour delivery, that sort of thing. So I think, all of these are becoming really key considerations and actually necessities for retailers. And, as you say, as Claire was saying, that creates a more loyal consumer, because if you know that you're going to get this excellent service and you're going to get your item and you don't necessarily have to go into the store for it, then, that's a really good selling point for you to buy something from that brand.
To jump back to the consumer for a second, one of the things I was really curious about is how are people finding ways of mitigating it against the ability to touch each other? Laura, do you want to kick off with this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but loads and loads of my friends have actually got pets during the lockdown, so dogs or cats or whatever. And, owning these little animals is sort of proving a bit of a lifesaver, really, for lots of people, because it's like that kind of sense of companionship. And obviously, you can touch them, you can smother them with love. And, they provide like are sort of, they give you some structure and they lift your mood and they reduce loneliness and stuff. I think especially for people that either have young families or people that maybe live alone. I can think of at least 2 or 3 of my friends who've got cats, and then, double that number who've got little dogs and things. So I think I was reading the other day something like pet classified sites are seeing like a 6-fold increase in sign-ups, and something like, 155 views per advert on Pets for Homes, which is just crazy. And, people are sort of gazumping each other trying to buy puppies and things. So yeah, I definitely think that pet ownership is really spiking, and I think that's because people are really craving that kind of intimate connection that they can't have necessarily with their friends or with their loved ones or whatever. So they're sort of smothering their animals with love and with care.
I mean, that's something that I've actually been doing through this pandemic period. I've fostered a greyhound, and it has been one of the best experiences that I can think of. It's been lovely.
Yeah, and we can back that up from a beauty point of view as well. Pet beauty products have seen quite an uptick, quite a spike during lockdown and during this period. And it's been in particularly things like shampoos and grooming materials. So, we are actively looking to, comfort and very sensorial sort of, it's a very sensorial experience for both parties. And I think, we're looking for excuses to groom and pet and pamper. And I think that's filling quite a big touch void for people in beauty as well, in terms of how people have been finding ways to fulfill that need for touch. We've definitely sort of seen a shift to rituals, not routines, is how we've been describing it. And everyday beauty routines have been a real anchor point for people during this period, and they've been a real source of comfort. And things like the very much the everyday cleanse, tone, moisturize have very much become about self-care. They've become more meditative, more sensual. It's been a time for people to be very focused on themselves, and it's been very much about just the movement, the action of actually cleansing or washing your face. And we've seen, because of that, sales of tools, particularly tools that are just beautiful, are ergonomic, are just delicious to touch. We've seen those becoming more and more popular. So you've got gua sha and brushes and applicators. So people are really sort of filling that touch void with just actually making those very basic everyday routines that we do much more sensual. And on the back of that as well, bath and body products have been huge. Obviously, they fulfill the need for hygiene, but water on skin is deeply tactile. It replicates a lot of human touch. So products that are very sensual, so lots of foams, lots of oils, have really been very popular during this period, and it's people that's what people are using to fill that need for touch, that sort of sensuality.
Claire, you've just basically started to make me salivate and want to buy a ton of stuff in the beauty sector. I'm like, where are these products? Send me a list, please. You'll have to do it after this episode.
But they're really fun as well. I think that's the thing. Touch is very joyful, and there's been things like shower fizzers that sort of explode, and they'll fizz on your feet and they'll release scent, and it is that we're just craving that stimulation, I think. So yes, I'll point you in the right direction, definitely, Peter.
But to move into sort of the design futures sector, Martina, in your touch report, you looked at some technology solutions that recreate a sense of touch or intimacy as we're all scared of coming into contact with each other. Martina, can you tell us a little bit more about what those sorts of things look like?
Sure. So creatives and designers are kind of using the absence of touch as like a sort of beautiful and creative constraints to create solutions, especially using technology as a medium to create such solutions. So I'll bring you an example, a very interesting example by Lucy McRae. She's an Australian fictional and speculative designer, and she defines herself as a body architect. And last year she created this speculative project called Compression Carpet. And basically compression carpet is like an artificial machine that reproduces the sensation of hugging. So through her research, she discovered that when we hug a person, the skin-to-skin contact releases certain chemicals in the human brain that are responsible for regulating our mood, to help us to de-stress and relax. And basically through this machine, which is like a sort of artificial machine created by textile that inflates and deflates.
It kind of looks like a cocoon, doesn't it?
Exactly. It creates exactly this. It creates through inflation and deflation, it creates the feeling of like a human hug.
And moving on to sort of the beauty industry, because it's an industry that is very much built upon touch. When we go to the hairdresser, someone's touching our hair. There's nothing more joyous than having your hairdresser wash your hair. How is that going to change as a result of this fear of touch, Claire?
Hugely. There's no other way about it. I mean, the impact that this has had on the beauty industry, our in-store experience has been, great, but the impact it's had on the professional sector and treatments, the shifts are pretty much, tectonic. They are huge. So as well as the sort of, the PPE and the more visible hygiene, the whole industry is changing. It's less spontaneous for one thing. The walk-in is pretty much a thing of the past now. So you're going to get your nails done anyway. So it's less of a treat. The experience will be much more pared back. So no waiting areas, no glossy magazines, no extra cappuccino and a bit of cake or a glass of fizz. So the experience, the pleasurable, and it is part of the experience. A lot of that has sort of gone away. In terms of hair and nails, these areas are bouncing back fairly quickly. They're adapting. They really sort of hit the ground running. And consumer confidence is definitely there. But we're looking at shorter appointments. We're looking at, possibly a move away from in hair styles that need a lot of colour, because that means more high maintenance and more salon visits. So we are seeing a shift to shorter hairstyles, low maintenance hairstyles, less colour. So all these things that you might not think about are having a huge impact. But when you get into the areas of things like facials and massages, I mean, that's where things are still getting tricky, and we're still finding our way as an industry. You're definitely seeing an edited, menu of services and shorter treatments at the moment. People are still very nervous, so there's a lot of focus on below the neck treatments. Anything that's, let's say, from the body down. Pedicures people are a lot more comfortable with having pedis, because basically they're further away from your head. So I know you're tall like me, Peter, so bonus. we've looked out on that one. But also and I think just the idea of hands-on, so a lot more touch-free treatments ongoing, a lot more tools already happening. LMS have already launched a no-touch facial, which is really interesting, and that basically involves tools that are used to massage the face that can be, also easily sterilized. It involves a lot of light therapy, and I'm also expecting to see things like hydrotherapy things coming through.
What about things like, we've sort of seen, and I don't know, this is anecdotal, but I've sort of seen from a lot of people that I know, the sort of rise of like the Theragun and those sort of handheld massages at home. Where do you see them fitting into sort of the broader massage therapy landscape moving forward? Are they going to be a replacement, or are they just really kind of like a sports or a halfway house, or where do you see it?
No, I think we're definitely long-term going to a much more human-free, never mind hands-free. I think we're going human-free long-term in terms of massage. We're already starting to see robot massages coming through that will replicate that sort of human touch. And back in January, when I was in CES, which seems like forever ago now, I had the pleasure of trying out some of the massage chairs there, which, at the time it seemed like quite gimmicky and fun, and I was sort of aching after a day of trade shows and hopped into one of these chairs, and it was amazing. It really did feel like a deep tissue sports massage. It felt like fingertips. It was a little unnerving at times. But now that suddenly seems, something that was quite fun and gimmicky suddenly has taken on a much greater importance. And I definitely think we'll see an acceleration of a lot of the tech that we saw that was sort of nice to have and gimmicky. It's suddenly found a new purpose.
Claire and Laura, you've both written so much around designing for distance, the rise of the untapped economy. Could you both tell us a little bit more about what this will look like for consumers and for retailers? Maybe Laura, maybe you can kick off with this one.
Yeah, of course. I think, from a very basic perspective, you're talking about built-in distancing. So, social distance markers, queuing markers, staggered entering to stores, and that kind of thing, screens, protective measures, that kind of thing. I think another thing that we've been seeing a lot of is kind of merchandising and product placement for speed. So obviously kind of facilitating a faster experience, a more streamlined trip to the store. So, people who just want to get in and out quickly, which is obviously the complete inverse of, what we were talking about for so long in retail, which is all about enabling discovery and encouraging extending dwell time and things like that. So I think, shifting to this kind of grab and go model, maybe even having like a sort of quicker entrance and exit for people who want just to come in and grab something and leave, and people who want to browse and have a bit more of a leisurely shopping experience, which is kind of few and far between these days. And then also, designing for distancing, of course, is all about technology and contactless tech. So we're seeing things like autonomous stores, the rise of that sort of Amazon Go model of cashierless shopping, contactless payments, built-in drive-throughs, and what I was saying earlier about the whole omnichannel explosion. So, buy online, pick up in store being integrated into physical stores with clearer procedures, with better technology to kind of enable that, and that kind of thing.
Claire, what does it look like for beauty?
Well, it's a real challenge for beauty. As you mentioned earlier, this is an industry that's built on touch and testing. And I think one of the biggest things of design for distancing, one of the biggest challenges is how do you safely sample products? During lockdown and ongoing, we saw this real quick uptick of virtual try-on tools, and that's something that's going to stick. This is a behaviour that's going to carry on. People have got very comfortable with it now. The technology is so good, we can very easily at home or in store try a product on. But equally, we still want to touch things. So I think your experience at a beauty counter, that's going to be very different ongoing. We're looking at also touch reducing tools. We're looking at sealed monodose testers, single serving dispensers as well of products, so that you can still get to try things very safely at countertops. But it's going to be a very different experience. It's also, product design is very interesting how that's affecting, because we want to be able to find things on the shelves, but we also don't want people to touch, pick up and read everything. And if you think about, the way a lot of products are designed, a lot of the info that you need tends to be on the back. So already, brands need to be thinking about larger fonts, putting the key benefits to the front of a box, using colour to help people navigate shelves and find things quickly. So to go back to Laura's, grab and go sort of ethos, we need to actually be able to help people to find what they need very quickly. QR codes, again, starting to come through, so you can very quickly scan a product, find out what the benefits, the ingredients, the details are, and then decide to pick it up.
Yeah, and even things like shoppable windows. So shoppable windows were a bit of a trend a few years ago. They never really took off. But now we're seeing, because people are queuing outside stores, especially department stores, for example, retailers are experimenting with QR codes in windows. So, you can see something whilst you're queuing, and then you can buy it there and then you don't even need to enter the store.
So many of these technologies that were fun and gimmicky have now become, real must-haves and have really found a value.
I mean, QR codes for such a long time, they kind of were this real novelty that never took off, except for, I mean, they really did take off in Asia, but they never really took off in the West. And among a lot of retail pundits, they were kind of seen as a bit of a joke. And now they're becoming really intrinsic and essential to the retail experience. But to go back to Claire's point on the labeling, one of the interesting things I saw come out as sort of stores were reopening in the UK was that Waterstones, the bookseller, was putting the books with the blurbs facing outwards. So putting rather than having the spines out or the covers out, they were having the backs of the books out so that people could read what was on the back of the book, and so to understand what it was about without actually having to touch it, which I think is a really interesting shift in terms of how product is displayed.
Yeah, I love that. That's really interesting. It's exactly the same thing.
Exactly. There were a few cover illustrators that were getting a little bit upset on Twitter, though, about it because their beautiful designs weren't being shown anymore. To go back to explore in a little bit more depth, something that we were talking about a little bit earlier, in terms of enhancing intimacy and moving towards a high-touch experience, what are some of the other things that are happening in this space?
I think, it's all about brands trying to recreate that kind of high-touch human experience, but with technology. So kind of connecting people with sales associates virtually. So, Zoom, Skype, FaceTime, whatever. Especially in the luxury end of the market where, it's very hard to sell a very high value item like a watch or something online. You've got watchmakers like Hublot, for example. They've launched like a digital boutique. So they're kind of using Skype and FaceTime, and sales advisors are actually sort of trying to recreate that level of customer experience that shoppers would expect if they were in store, really focusing on sort of personalization and stuff. And then we've also seen a massive rise in texting, not just as a sales channel, but as a kind of customer service tool. So brands setting up kind of WhatsApp groups, beauty brands especially, I'm sure Claire can talk about that more, but also, support networks and creating that kind of emotional connection with the consumer via texting or via WhatsApp for sort of advice or, anything really.
Yeah, I have been so impressed by the sort of virtual appointments and consultations that the beauty industry has been doing. It's really brought, as I say, this different level of service, and as well as just things like online consultancies where you can they just have skin checks and things. There's been some really creative sort of workshop things as well. Fragrance and selling fragrance online, nightmare. How do you do it? And we've seen, brands who have set up workshops where you order in advance your scenting kit, and then you take part in this workshop, and it's a whole experience. And then you have people like Face Gym who, they're based on facial yoga exercises. That's the whole thing. You go to the store, you have this at the counter, and they took the whole thing online. And that again really did feel like, we're talking about touch and the importance of touch. You could do it as a group, you could do it as a couple, and you basically, had your virtual consultation, you learn how to massage your face and touch yourself. And I think this creativity has been really, really impressive, and I've loved it.
To wrap up this episode, we'll ask the question that we always do. What should companies be doing in the short term and the long term in response to this evolving shift? Martina, shall we start with you?
Sure. In the short term, I believe that companies should focus on fewer but unique human connections. So reduce the touch points in real life, but make these touch points very meaningful and very emotionally charged. And in the long term, I believe they should focus on technology and using technology almost as an emotional enhancer, and really using tech applications, tech solutions to enhance these fewer touch points and make them very emotionally, and really reproduce through technology the absence of touch and the feeling of human touch and connection.
Laura, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so short term, I would say focus on safety, prioritize, the safety and the health of your consumers, prioritize cleanliness, reassuring messaging, make sure hygiene's front and center in store. Longer term, it's going to be really important to kind of think about ways of rebuilding intimacy in store and how you can kind of make your consumer feel very safe and protected in the long term. So you need to be as agile as possible as well. Like, you need to adapt to new platforms, technology, new circumstances, and also, be fully prepared for a second wave to hit.
And lastly, Claire, what are your short-term and long-term strategies in response?
Yeah, I can echo my colleagues, really. I think short term, it's going to be about trust and safety and creating an environment or an experience where people are happy to sample things, to just think of new ways of doing things and focus on that short term. Long term, absolutely tech. It is going to replace so much of the touch and the intimacy. But I think also really think about this this very concierge-like, this very personal experience that we've managed to create for people, and how we can extend that. Can we take it into products? Definitely. So we're looking at very multi-sensory products. We're looking at personal products, bespoke products, blends of products that people can really trust and feel very secure in.
And that's all we have time for today. Thanks for listening to the WGSN podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, then please subscribe to us. You can find us on all major podcast platforms. And if you really like what you heard, then please leave us a rating and review. It really does help us to get the word out there. In our next episode, Carla Basashi will be speaking to WGSN's Food and Drink Director, Cara Nielsen, on the future of food and drink. But in the interim, if you want to learn more about what we've been talking about, then please head over to WGSN.com to find out how you can get access to much more insight and analysis. And if you're already a WGSN subscriber, head over to the site where we've pulled together all of our research on touch and the contactless economy with key points from this podcast in one handy report. Thanks to our guests for being here, and I'd also like to thank our show producer, Roland Burdenham. And again, thank you for being here. Please stay well and healthy, and we'll see you next time. Bye!